In this lesson, we're going to learn how to finish out our UVs and get those ready to import into Photoshop. Alright, so let's go ahead and open up our UV editor. And this is done underneath the Edit UVs rollout. Now what we want to do here is we want to finish up our UVs. We had talked about flattening out these UVs, and we have these different clusters, and these are all being used on specific parts of our arcade machine. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that they are the proper scale. So the best way to check your scale is to use the checker pattern that's up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and left click on one of these UV spots here. And I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click on this drop down and then just select that checker pattern. Notice what happens on the model. Notice that we have this checker pattern that shows up. Now you might be asking, how is this helping? What does this do for me? Well, what it does is it actually shows you the squash and stretch of your UVs. The goal that we want in mind, or at the end of this, is that we want these checker patterns to be perfectly square. Now the only way that we can do that is by scaling these clusters. So looking at this, I know that if I scaled this in the X direction, it would allow me to stretch out these checker patterns. So what I can do is I can come in and I can left click and hold on that. And let's go ahead and grab the scale, but make sure that it's in the horizontal direction. Now what I can do is I can go ahead and scale this. So left click and hold, and if I scale this to where it's a little thinner, notice how the checker pattern is more square. Let's do the same thing for this one. So select it, let's go to the other side so we can see it. And let's go ahead and scale that down. Now we don't have to be absolutely perfect. We want to get close, but we don't have to be absolutely perfect. Okay, and that looks pretty good. And then we need to do the same thing for this. So this is up at the top. Notice how very stretched that is, or actually very squashed that is in this direction. So I'm actually going to change the scale to this vertical scale, and we'll scale that down. And we'll continue to scale that until those are square. Good. Let's do the same thing for this one. Let's come over here. Let's see where that is, and we'll scale that down. There we go. And then finally, right here across the top, we have one more, and we'll scale that down. And again, you don't have to be absolutely perfect. Don't stress over it if it's not exact. This is your first day. Now you'll notice that looking at the rest of our arcade machine, we have some checker patterns that are much larger. We have some that are very small. And one thing that you will notice is that they are square for the most part. You'll get a pretty good result whenever you use that flatten mapping, but again, it's not the most optimized way of doing it. Like for the side of the cabinet here, that's a single polygon and a single cluster. We want to make sure that the square checker pattern is consistent. This is going to hold its own image on that, or its own texture on that. Okay, and so we want to place that. So now that you have the squash and the stretch all together, okay, in those important areas, and that's all set up properly. Now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and pack that into this space here. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we will grab these pieces here, and I'm going to grab my move tool, and I'm just going to put those as closely as I can together. Okay, and then I'm going to take this, I'm going to move it down underneath, just like this. Okay, nothing overlapping. And I'm just getting those close together. Okay, and then I'm going to take all of these, and I'm just going to scale them all in the same direction. So let's grab the uniform scale. I'm going to scale those down, and I'm going to put that right in here. Now the most important part of this arcade machine is going to be the sides, as that's going to get the most views. Okay, that's what people are going to pay attention to the most. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to scale it from this point in the corner. Now what I can do is I can change the point in which it's being scaled. So you'll notice this little cross right here. It's right in the center of our selection. So let's actually left click on this and set it to the bottom left corner. Notice that cross piece is moved to the bottom left of the UV selection. Let's go ahead and scale that up. Okay. And let me try that one more time. Let's scale that up. There we go. Now it's working properly. I would really like the arcade machine to get a lot of space, but I can't give it quite that much. So let's go up to right about here. Then let's take these pieces and let's move these up into here. And actually, you know what? Let's take this, put it right here, and take this and we'll move it in here. Now you can also rotate these around. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Normally what I like to do whenever I'm rotating is I like to turn on the angle snap. This is in your interface, so you may have to move that out of the way and turn that on. And then I'll rotate that 90 degrees. Place that right into here. Now there's really not much room left for the rest of this, so I'm actually going to take these and I'll scale those down. And let's go ahead and place that. I'll do something like that. There we go. And let me see if I can actually fit these in. Now you'll notice that during the UVing process, this is kind of like creating a puzzle, if you will. You'll try different solutions, trying to get it to all fit. The overall positioning doesn't really matter. It's usually the overall scale. Okay. All right, so that's positioned there. Now we need to get the rest of this all in this area. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take these pieces. These are really important. And I'm going to group them together. And so I'm just going to scroll down and hit Group Selected. Now what I'll do is I'll select all of them, and I'm going to hit this Pack Custom. What this is going to do is it's going to pack all of those UVs into this space, but it's going to keep those pieces that I had already UV'd and the most important pieces together. So now with that packed, you'll notice that the squares all the way around are about the same size. All right, great. So now that's set. That's the arcade cabinet itself. We need to make sure that we do the same thing for the other pieces if absolutely necessary. So this is the glass. Let me go ahead and right click and hide it. And actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and UV it because it may come up with an issue later. It's always best to just UV it. Okay, so let's go ahead and take that. I'm going to select those UVs, so go to polygon mode, select around that, and just simply come up here and say mapping, flatten mapping, and OK. It's going to place it in that area. It's not a real important piece, so I'm just going to leave it just the way it is. Then let's go ahead and turn off the unwrap. Let's right click on it and hide selection. Let's take our TV screen. We need to do the same thing. That needs to be UV'd. So unwrap UVW, open that up in the editor. Okay, and again, you'll see it's way out here. Go ahead and turn on polygon mode and element, select everything in there, and just simply come in and say mapping, flatten mapping, okay. Okay, so that's going to be flattened out. You could go ahead and check the checker pattern on that one if you wanted to, and you'll see that that looks pretty good. Okay, so we'll close that. That's good. Let's also do the outside of our screen here. Now, usually I don't like to unwrap objects that have a turbo smooth on them. Okay, and so what I'll do is I'll go ahead and go to Editable Poly and then apply the unwrap UVW. Notice that that is now in between the Edit Poly and the turbo smooth. Now if you come in and you unwrap this, I'm just going to do a quick flatten mapping. Again, because it's not going to have an actual texture on it, it's just in case one of my materials doesn't like that. So with that set, we'll go to turbo smooth, and there we go. Okay. So everything else has been unwrapped. You could go ahead and unwrap the buttons, but we won't have to do that for those. Okay, I know that we're not going to be using any materials that rely on maps for that. Okay, so now that we have that all unwrapped, we can go ahead and right click and unhide all. And there we go. So now in our next lesson, what we're going to do, actually, before we do that, let's do this. Let's take our object. We need to export out our UV template. So under the Unwrap UVW modifier, you want to open up your editor. Now this is going to be the arcade machine. Okay, and so with this, what we'll do is we'll go into Tools, Render UVW Template. This is going to allow us to save out an image of this UVW template that we can bring into Photoshop. And so I'm going to give this a pretty good amount here, okay, on the width and height. So let's do 2048. Let's try to type that in again, 2048 by 2048. Okay. Let's render UVW template, and it's going to render that out. Now I know it looks a little messed up, but that's okay. It's based on the view itself. So if you zoom in, you'll notice that those lines are continuous. So you can use your mouse wheel to zoom in and out. Now to save this, we'll simply go to Save, and then we'll tell it where we want this to save at. In our case, I'm going to browse to our 3ds Max files and go to Scene Assets and Images, and then we'll call this arcade underscore UVW. Now I save it as a PNG file, so that way I can save out the transparencies, and you'll see that here in just a moment in our next lesson. So with that saved and exported, we'll talk about how to bring that into Photoshop and start creating a texture for our arcade machine. So I'll see you then.